UK Cinema History, Episode 40, The Hounds of Baskervilles, 1959, from Hammer Studios and starring Peter Cushing. Hello and welcome to UK Cinema History. Today we're going to be discussing The Hounds of the Baskervilles from 1959, starring Peter Cushing, and from Hammer Studios. I'm just going to wait and see who shows up. Hello, Kathy. Thank you for coming. We always appreciate you. Give me just a moment while I ping some people in. And there's Matt. Hello, Matt. How are you today? Good to see you. And hi, Bender. Let me give you guys some mod power. I hope you guys are enjoying your Thursday. I almost opened this room late because I got involved in the whole Kevin Spacey thing over in Don Field's room, and I literally started a conversation, and I had to say, sorry, I gotta go start my UK Cinema History room. So I left everybody arguing. Kind of a drop mic moment. How are you doing? Hi, how are you doing, Matt?
I'm doing good. Grateful to be here as always.
And we're grateful to have you. Go ahead, Matt.
Oh, doing good. I just see with the Peter Cushing in this one, I was watching an old video of if it's not This Is Your Life, it's some show like that where Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing were talking about how they were close friends in real life, and Christopher Lee would imitate Looney Tunes characters for him. And to see Christopher Lee do the voice of Yosemite Sam is very disconcerting.
That guy led a life, I tell you. Yeah, he was a spy during the war. He at the end of his life, he recorded a lead on a black metal album. I mean, gosh, Christopher Lee definitely lived a full life, and we'll be talking about him again when we do the Wicker Man later. So he's going to come back up. I don't know if Yazzy's going to be here, which is interesting because, of course, this was her pick, but we can't control real life events. But I'm just going to start get the room started and let people who come in catch up. And so I guess we'll start in PTR order. And was this your first time watching this version of Hounds of the Baskervilles High? And what were your thoughts on it?
It was, but just to be accurate, did Yazzie pick this or did you pick this? Because she wanted 7% solution.
Yeah, she wanted 7% solution, and we couldn't find a very good version of it. The version that I thought that was on YouTube was scouted out by you, Highbender. Very good job, by the way, to be only an hour of the film and in rather poor condition. So I asked her what a backup would be, and this was her backup. So. Yeah, but this is her choice. But we'll get to what my thoughts on the film in a few.
Okay, so this was the first time I've seen it. I think it's more interesting than good, but I mean it's not the best version of Hound of the Baskervilles. It's not even the best UK version. A much better written version is 1988 TV movie starring Jeremy Brett as Sherlock Holmes, one of the very best versions of Holmes, and written by Trevor Bowen. And also better is 1939's Hound of the Baskervilles, written by Ernest Pascal and starring iconic Basil Rathbone as Sherlock Holmes. What's for me interesting about this version is it's a Hammer film, and Hammer has an important place in British cinema from the mid 1950s to 1970s. They brought back a lot of iconic supernatural monsters such as Dracula and Frankenstein and the Mummy, but put them in color for the first time, and very vivid color with an emphasis on things like red blood. And there was a really large audience hungry for that kind of mix of dread and gore and sexuality. Um, and they did very well for a time. In the 1960s, more stylish and better films such as Bonnie and Clyde and The Wild Bunch beat them on the gore part. And then George Romero's Night of the Living Dead beat them on the horror part. But for a time, they brought something new and fresh to films, and they they have a fairly unique look um, of this kind of gothic era, and they're interesting. And this is interesting because it's trying to blend that horror vibe with Sherlock Holmes. Not entirely successful, but again, interesting. For example, there's a scene where Sir Henry is in a hotel and one of his boots goes missing. And then he lifts the other boot to gesture with it, and a tarantula comes out and almost kills him. Um, but if you think about it, and by the way, I'm going to be nitpicky here, but this is a Sherlock Holmes film. The whole point of Holmes is to be nitpicky and pay attention to details. So if you think about it, if you're going to put a tarantula in someone's boots for the sake of killing him, you would not then steal one of the boots, because that way the guy you're targeting would not put on the boots. He'd put on the boots if he has the two boots, and put his foot in the one with a tarantula and be stung to death. So why would you steal one of the boots? It makes absolutely no sense. Um, Now, in the actual story, uh, there is no. I mean, the Conan Doyle story, there is no tarantula. That's something they put in because it's a Hammer film. But actually, um, he puts out a new pair of boots so they could be varnished, get a layer of protection, um, and the bad guy steals one of the boots because he wants Sir Henry's scent so that the dog can go after him. But because they're new boots, they're useless for that because they don't have his scent yet. So then he returns the boot that he stole, uh, and trying to convince Sir Henry it was just misplaced rather than actually taken. And then Sir Henry puts out another pair of boots that he has worn, and then he steals a boot from that, and he uses that, he weaponizes that boot to eventually direct the dog to kill him. Now, this is all, first of all, the point of having the two pairs of boots is that it points out, well, why would the first boot be returned? Because it didn't have a scent on it. You don't get that in this version because they do away with a new pair of boots. So there's any number. So you lose that bit of deductive reasoning, but also again the tarantula makes no sense. The whole point of using the hound is so that the actual murderer doesn't get identified. It's so that a dog or a legendary dog gets, or supernatural being gets identified instead of going after an actual murderer. But if you're putting a tarantula in someone's boot, that someone did that. That doesn't, tarantulas are not going around London, and where he went on his trip, there weren't tarantulas. So it had to be a human being who put that in there, which destroys the whole point of using the hound. At that point, you've identified, yes, as a human being trying to kill Sir Henry. So it just kills. In other words, the writing is not very good on this. And other examples are in both the 1939 and 1988 versions, when Holmes is read the legend, he just read it. It's like a quick thing, and that's the legend. That's where we're starting from. But in this version, they actually show you. They play out the whole thing as if it's real. Again, it misses the point because the point is that it's just a legend. It's just a fairy tale, and that the bad guy uses it as a mechanism for murder, but there was no actual, you know, supernatural hound, and it was made up. So by showing it as if it actually happened, again, you're missing the point of mechanisms of a story. And lastly, the woman who is supposed to be the sister of a bad guy, um, and in the first in the 1939 version, she ends up falling in love with Sir Henry, and and in the 1988 version, she does too. The thing is, in the 1988 version, it follows a Conan Doyle story in which she's actually married to the bad guy, pretending to be his sister, but he's a monster and he's keeping her under his thumb. And so she also genuinely falls in love with Sir Henry, and he rescues her from this evil guy. The point in both of those versions is that um, the Sir Henry basically fixes the Baskerville legend, the Baskerville curse, by rescuing a woman, um, instead of uh, instead of imprisoning her and killing her. So it's a redemption story, and this totally misses the boat. It makes the woman basically a harpy who ensnares men with her sexuality to destroy them, which is really misogynist and just misses the whole point of the story being redemption story. So um, lots of problems with this on a script level. But again, it's a Hammer film. It's interesting. It's got the interesting look of a Hammer film. It's got the two major stars of Hammer, which are Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. Christopher Lee played Dracula. Peter Cushing played Dr. Frankenstein, and also Van Helsing. I think Christopher Lee is pretty much wasted in this, but Peter Cushing, it's his first shot at Sherlock Holmes. It's decent. It's certainly not the best version, but it led to his later playing Holmes. And
Christopher Lee also interpreted Doku, the wonderful Doku from Star Wars. I think so. Um, was wonderful. Uh, mm.
so, as I was saying, uh, Peter Cushing went on to star in a BBC series, 16 episodes, playing Holmes. And then shortly before he died, he did one other feature film, which some critics feel is his best version of Holmes. Um, I'll just mention one thing that was interesting about the dog. The dog was named Colonel, and they originally I should also say this is Hammer Films is famous for taking black and white stuff and making it into color. This is the first Sherlock Holmes movie to be filmed in color. Um, it was planned to be the first of a series, but it didn't do well because it's got lots of issues, as I just mentioned. But they were, in terms of a dog, they were thinking about using animation, but decided it would cost too much. So they found this actual dog named Colonel, who was typecast because he once bit a barmaid. So they thought he would have a necessary level of ferocity. Um, and in fact, they in the climactic scene, they had part of a set in miniature where the dog's supposed to leap onto Sir Henry, and they used a small boy named Robert dressed to duplicate Christopher Lee. Colonel didn't like the sound of crumpled paper, so a prop man crumpled some paper to get Colonel to go towards him. What they didn't know is Colonel also, in addition to crumpled paper, Colonel hated little boys. So the Colonel ignored the paper and he went straight for the poor kid, and the prop man caught the dog in midair before he got to Robert. So that was one bit of drama with the dog. The other was they were trying to get, in another scene, trying to get Colonel to jump onto Christopher Lee, um, and he wouldn't. So he started prodding him, and then finally Christopher Lee gave up and let his guard down. And at that moment, Colonel lunged at him and bit right through one of his arms. So there's there's that as kind of an interesting background on the making of the film. So those are my initial bits of trivia about the film. It's highly problematic. um, I think it's again, I wouldn't call it a good film, but I do think it's interesting. For it's important that Hammer Film be represented in our discussions of UK cinema, and um, the kind of weird way Hammer Film tried to make a Sherlock Holmes story into a Hammer film by putting in like a tarantula and having the woman be someone who tries to use sexuality as a weapon, which is, what happens in a lot of Hammer's vampire movies. Things like that. It's just this weird juxtaposition of things. So it's interesting. And, I'll be interested to hear what Matt and Eric have to say about it.
Thanks, Hi. As far as the tarantula goes, there is a scene where Sherlock Holmes explains that when he put the tarantula there, he was assuming that people would think that he had come from brought it from South Africa. And he points out two things. Number one, tarantulas are poisonous, but they're not venomous. So unless he had a heart condition, the way that Canterville, Baskerville. I'm getting my parts of England confused. Baskerville does. A bite from a tarantula wouldn't be harmful to them. And number two, they're indigenous to South America, not to Africa. So and it's a Holmesian moment, but
No,
the part of but it doesn't explain the boot. It doesn't explain the boot.
it's
You are
not a
correct.
Holmesian moment for someone who could do 2 seconds of research to realize the tarantula doesn't make any sense. That's not a Holmesian moment. That's a Wikipedia moment. So no, it's just really bad writing. I'm aware of that scene. I'm just saying the tarantula makes no sense. And your mentioning Holmes's comments don't make it make any more sense. It just points out further how much it doesn't make sense.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Matt, your thoughts? And was this your first time watching the 59 version?
Yeah, first time watching the 59 version. I read all the Sherlock Holmes stuff, when I was like 13 or so. I've seen different movies and TV shows of him throughout the years, but I haven't read the original of the Baskervilles in a while, so thanks for the kind of comparison. Hi. Maybe this one should have been called Tarantulas of the Baskervilles. Would have been good, but um, I don't know. Yeah, I think it was okay. I think this is nice to look at. It's worth noting the director, Terrence Fisher, also directed the several of the early Frankenstein and Dracula pictures Hammer did. So you had just 2 years before this one, you had Curse of Frankenstein, which was the first Hammer Frankenstein film, and then the year before this, you had Dracula, which was in, as we mentioned, with Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. Peter Cushing, I think, makes for a pretty bitchy Sherlock Holmes, which seems to match what I remember of him from the stories. The actor they have doing Watson, I really didn't like much at all, and Christopher Lee looks like 30 pounds of shoe polish in his hair, and it seems to be in autopilot mode in this. Yeah, I agree with High. Not one of my favorites, but it's nice to look at. I think some of the women's seduction stuff reminds me a little bit of some of the, oh, what is it? Dracula's Bride, or whatever the Universal one is, the second one, Bride of Dracula. Kind of got a feeling off of that. But yeah, you can do worse. You can certainly do better. It's kind of slightly below average, I'd say.
I think this movie was one of the first movie of Dracula. I think
I'd
so.
like to introduce you real quick, just because we record this as a podcast. Jorge, thank you for joining your stage. We appreciate you being here. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah, my name is correctly. My pronunciation correct is Jorge. Okay, you are correct. Don't worry.
Well,
I
thank you
am
for joining us,
from
Jorge.
Mexico. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, everyone. I am very interesting to the comment about Christopher Lee and the interpreter of this movie of the Hound of the Baskervilles. I never seen this movie before, but I think it's the Sherlock Holmes or something like that. I think it's very interesting. Um, mm, I certainly I need to watch this movie because I think if it's interpreted by Christopher Lee, could be interesting for me. Um,
It's free on YouTube. Yeah, and Christopher Lee plays Baskerville, and Peter Cushing plays Holmes. I also want to welcome our good friends Kathy, Helena, and Shirag to the audience. We always appreciate having somebody. I'm going to disagree with both of you. This is probably my favorite adaptation of Hound of the Baskervilles. Um, and I would say that overall, over his career arc, Peter Cushing is my second favorite Holmes. My favorite, of course, being Jeremy Brett from the Great Granada series from the 1980s. But I disagree with High. I dislike very much the 1988 Granada version with Jeremy Brett. Which is an episode that they did kind of on the cheap. They didn't have John Madden, who normally did directed them. Brett was at the time being treated with lithium for his bipolar disorder, and you can see it. It's just agonizing to watch. He's just the dramatic pauses because he just can't remember his lines. They add in the whole thing with having given the brother criminal a lobotomy 12 years before there ever was a lobotomy. You've got all the footage from old episodes just kind of intercut of trains, and you get the whole bit. But it reminds me this is a very difficult novel to adapt. And one of the most difficult things about it, I think, is that Sherlock Holmes is missing from it for such a large section. And where I disagree with both of you is I don't think Christopher Lee is wasted in this film as Henry Baskerville, because while Peter Cushing is my second favorite Sherlock Holmes, Andre Morell is my favorite Dr. Watson. I think he absolutely pins it. And during that section that where Baskerville and Watson, and so Lee and Morell, have to carry the film, where they become kind of the detective duo, which is almost the meatiest 25 minutes of this film. You have to have an actor of Lee's standing to be able to carry that section of the film. And what I love most about this is that when Sherlock Holmes pops up, it's at exactly that moment where I, as a viewer, am saying, "Gosh, I kind of miss Peter Cushing," and there he is in a cloak hiding, and it's great. But what I think this film really accomplishes well is what Hai said, which is combining that kind of gothic version of that Hammer does so incredibly well. You know, we covered them before when we did the Vampire Lovers. With the Edwardian version of Holmes, and this was, of course, that second round for Holmes, 8 years after he'd in the final problem had killed the character off. But instead of this being the return of Sherlock Holmes, where he had actually brought him back to life, Conan Doyle set this back before the final problem and reset it back into the Victorian era. But this is definitely, you know, a very Edwardian work. And a couple of things. For instance, the use of the tarantula to create the kind of how do I put this, impetus or tension before Baskerville goes to his estate. I think that's very good, and I think works much better as a simple film scene than in the novel, where you have that whole nonsense with the cutting out the cutout words from the newspaper, and Sherlock Holmes going to and hiring the boy to go to the hotel to find the disposed of newspapers, to see which newspapers the words got cut out of, and put the articles together, and all of which would have been just total monotony in a film. Whereas here you've got that just one simple thing. Okay, you know there's a menace. In both cases, in the case of the letter, and you've got also the whole thing about what stock of paper was being used and what hotel he was staying at, and all of that. By disposing of all of that and just making simply the tarantula, okay, yes, there's a menace, and we know it's a human being. I also disagree with Hai that it's a mistake to have dramatized the opening, because unless you have that sense that maybe there is a supernatural explanation, then you're going to miss out on half of the enjoyment of the film. Because if you were just waiting for Sherlock Holmes to prick the bubble open, and Holmes himself several times in both the novel and in this film says, you know, I'm up against something far more evil than I've ever dealt with before. And without that sense that maybe this could have a supernatural explanation, I don't think you can enjoy this film the way I really did. But the number one reason I love this film is Peter Cushing's just wonderful performance, and of course Cushing was a very big fan of the Sherlock Holmes character and had a lot of influence on the props that were being used. And we all know how Peter Cushing loves props, you know, and you have that scene with him and Dr. Mortimer and Watson, and he's playing with the chess pieces, and then he grabs the tongs and grabs the piece of coal to light his pipe with, and just all those wonderful little things, you know, and the way that and Hammer was really, really good with that stuff. And the other thing that I really love is his physical performance in this. Matt used the phrase that he was kind of fey, but the eyebrow movements and the and the facial tics and the twerks that just told everything. The other thing that I really liked about this was the boiling the ending down, so you don't have them being brother and sister like you do in the '88 version. You don't have them actually being husband and wife. This actually is a father-daughter relationship, and so the daughter is actually fighting for her own inheritance, and I love that. And I love also the fact that because this is a Hammer film, you have a woman with the Hammer cleavage hanging out, which it was part of what they did, allowed to be big and dramatic and have these scenes, and because they made her Spanish, she can have that passionate. But then here's where Lee lets you down, is because where I thought he was absolutely great in the scenes with him and Morel as Watson as the kind of substitute detective. He's terrible in those pseudo romantic scenes. The scene where he's trying to kiss her before her father walks in is he at one point it looks like he's kissing her eyeball, and it's just no, the lips are over here, Chris. I mean, and those scenes are a mess. And the other thing that obviously the Grenada version was even more disappointing to me, but the Hound is always a disappointment in these. But at least I think this film makes an effort to explain that and put it into the context, because what Sherlock Holmes is trying to tell us at the end is that the Hound was a creation of our own imagination, and that's why it's so disappointing. Whereas I have to give it to the 1939 film. They handled the Hound scene a lot better than they did this one, which both this and the Granada version, it's a blink as you miss it. But where this is my favorite version of the Baskervilles, and obviously the 1939 Basil Rathbone version is second. I would surprisingly, my third favorite was the episode of the BBC Sherlock from 2010 with what's his name, Benadryl Kumquat and Bilbo Baggins there in the modern day version, where Hound turned out to actually be the name of a CIA program and involved and I rewatched this one and kind of that one in prep for this episode, as well as rewatching the Granada version and the 1939 version, and that one is actually I was very surprised, quite solid, because of course that was a show that really fell off the rails in its third season. But this was actually in part of its second season when it was still a strong show. And if you can find that anywhere online, I highly recommend that episode. And Kumquat or Cumberbatch, that guy, he's very, very good in this. He's in it, and actually he's usually very, very good when he's in his own language. It's only when they cast him as Americans that he's not very good. But yeah, those are my opening thoughts. But in terms of what I was talking about in terms of the writing and things like that, I think this is actually better written than the Granada version, because I think this is got much, I think, better dialogue. And I think it moves at a much better pace. I think it's directed much better, and I think in the shots of the moors and things like that, even though they're done in a studio, I believe them, and they look very, very good and very, very real to me. And the other thing is that use that Hammer does, where they can really brightly light a scene so you can see everything that's in that scene, and yet you feel like you're looking at it in absolute darkness, is just wonderful. And their ability to do that, because of the control that they had in the studio, so they don't have to use things like day for night filters and things like that. And just absolutely a sumptuous and gorgeous film to look at from beginning to end. And I think if you're going to do Sherlock Holmes in color, Eastman color, which is what they use for here, is perfect for it because it has that feel of like a fairy tale, unlike the 3-strip Technicolor of the time, which was much more realistic. This has that kind of matte finish photo feel. And it's just like I said, I think this is really my favorite of the adaptations of the Hounds of the Baskervilles that I've seen, and I've seen probably at least a dozen of them in my life. But those would be my opening thoughts.
Yeah, there's a lot of versions of it. Well, again, you and I bring different values to films, and I'm more focused on the writing,
That's
and
what makes this
you're more
room great, by the way. Hi.
you're more focused on the visuals. Uh, I do not disagree that in terms of production values, in terms of a look, um, this is better than the 1988 version, which is a TV movie. Um, but for me, that the writing is much more important, and the writing, I just simply disagree with you on the writing. The 1988 version is far superior in terms of writing because, in part, it's smarter. Things make sense in it. Um, it's not this weird kludge between a horror film and a Holmes film, and because it it feels like a Sherlock Holmes story. There is very little deduction, Holmesian like feel of, uh, you feel Sherlock reasoning things out. There isn't much of that in this, in this Hammer version. Um, in both the 88 version and the 39 version do a better job of it feeling like a Sherlock Holmes story, and of feeling that Sherlock Holmes is using his iconic deductive abilities throughout. And they're also, both of them are better paced than this is. The pacing on this is weird, um, because, again, it's trying to do two things at once, be a Holmes story and a Hammer movie. So to me, this is a weird hodgepodge, but visually, of course, it's interesting. I would just mention this this piece from The Guardian by Michael Newton on a retrospective on Hammer in 2013. He wrote, "Shot in Eastman color, the first batch of Hammer film movies, Terence Fisher's The Curse of Frankenstein, Dracula, and The Mummy, are among the loveliest looking British films of a decade. The early Hammer films offer a last gasp of British romanticism, with solid sets drenched in a soft brilliance of shadows, of grays, reds, and blues. When these films stray into the far woods, it's always autumn there, never spring. The leaves fall and the light shines golden and clear, compared with a well-lit contemporary look of the angry young men films. Hammer's mournful sumptuousness must have been even more striking. They play out a 1950s reverie of contagion, lust, and anxiety. Questions of guilt circulate in these films, where the virtuous can be transformed into vampires through one moment of sexual weakness." So, that's in this film as well. So, I think we'll just agree to disagree about the other stuff. But I agree with you that, there is a unique look to Hammer films, and this has, it's interesting to see that look applied to a Sherlock Holmes story.
Well, and if we always agreed, these would be very short, very boring rooms, Quite honestly. I will say this is not a film I would have chosen out of the Hammer. I would have preferred to have done Curse of Frankenstein or Dracula, or return to the 1970s lesbian vampire Karnstein trilogy. But I am really glad that Yazzie had us watch this, because rewatching it now, because of course I hadn't seen it in years and years and years, I mean, because it's not something that just pops up on Turner Classic Movies all the time or anything. Rewatching it now, fresh with the discussion of UK cinema, the way that we have over, since we've been doing these rooms in October, I was able to appreciate it on a different level, and I was really able to appreciate Peter Cushing and his performance on a different level. But back to the Granada version, I'm not nitpicking here, but the addition of making them brother and sister, for instance, made absolutely no sense in that version. The giving the criminal a lobotomy, I don't know why they added that part in. The fact that they show that Jeremy Brett lounging around while Watson and Baskerville are at Canterbury, when we find out later that he's been at Canterbury the entire time, makes absolutely so. I mean, both of them have their flaws when it comes to that. I do feel like most of the additions that they made to the novel here were maybe not technical great writing, but worked for me in the film. So, for instance, the addition of the kind of ritual sacrifice with the knife, and it sets up that great moment where to scare Dr. Mortimer, Sherlock Holmes, throws the knife, and that being the original knife from the beginning. I think that works very, very well here and creates that sense of menace. By making Stapleton Stapleton's daughter as opposed to his wife in the novel, or his sister in the book, I think that's a lot cleaner, because you don't have that nonsense with where you've got the third party who Stapleton attempted to seduce and tried to get her husband to divorce her, and used her to seduce the previous Baskerville, knowing full well about their heart problems. The introduction of Baskerville having a heart problem. All of these things actually worked for me, whereas the additions in the Granada version, and like the addition of that kind of silly romance at the end of the 1939 version, they didn't work for me. They clunked, and so I have always had a saying that I have a ton of respect for the original writer until I see it done better. And then I'll be like, yeah, no, just go with that. But what is kind of interesting is when you mess with the original Conan Doyle formula, you're treading on thin ice usually. And yet it seems to me I have yet to have seen a straight version of Hounds of the Baskervilles where they don't, in some way, shape, or form, have to reshape the story for the screen. And a lot of it has to do with reducing that amount of time that Sherlock Holmes is off screen. And I think what this film does really, really well is keeping that, but creating such an entertaining dynamic between Morell and Christopher Lee that you don't actually man, I wanted to see a movie about Sherlock Holmes. But to your point, Hi, you are 100% correct. If you are watching this film to see Sherlock Holmes solve a case and use his deductive reasoning and elementary, my dear Watson, and those things aren't in it. This is a Gothic reinterpretation of the Sherlock Holmes story. But then where I disagree with you is I think I'm getting that from the physical performance of Peter Cushing, especially the way he works with his eyebrows. So you feel like that thought process is working. So one of the dumber introductions, I think, that wasn't in either the book or any other version, was the whole webbed finger nonsense with the painting that's missing, which we can't know that the painting, because the painting is missing. He had web fingers, and then of course Stapleton has web fingers, so we know he's I think that just is just dumb. I think that was just a stupid introduction, quite honestly. But on the other hand, I can't think of a version of the Hound of the Baskervilles that doesn't have kind of a dumb workaround for stuff that works very, very well on the literary page that wouldn't work on film. So those would be my follow-ups. Hi, and Matt and Jorge.
Well, I'll briefly respond, and then I'll let Matt chime in if he wants to. Basically, we disagree. I'm not going to go point by point. I'll just say one thing that you mentioned, the point where Holmes says we're facing one of the greatest evils we've ever encountered, or something along those lines, which you mentioned as something you enjoyed, I thought was one of the absolute worst parts of the entire movie, because it's utterly unsupported by the film. It's something that, the writer just says without any underpinnings to support it. And so it's terrible writing. And that, to me, is symptomatic of, the writing overall. It's not thoughtful. It's not carefully, um, um, it's not thought out. Things don't connect to each other. It's sloppy. It's just not good writing. So that's my take on it. And yeah, again, it's I think that personally, when you guys figured out, well, when I told you 7% isn't available online, just as, as you very well put it last week, just as a DVD on eBay. Um, um, I think, you guys could have just picked another movie that was, unarguably good, instead of um, choosing something else that was Sherlock Holmes-ish. But you think this movie is really good, so I can't really argue with that. Um, we just have disagreements about the relative worth of this. But again, I thought it was interesting. Um, and I will pretty much shut up about it at this point, because I don't want to be a broken record. I'd love to hear any further thoughts from Matt and from Jorge.
I mean, I would go so far as to say with Christopher Lee's performance that he was even better in the Airport 77 than he was in this. But I don't know. It's okay. I wish I would have liked it more. I
Low
assume.
blow, Matt.
Yeah, yeah,
Low
yeah.
blow.
But I did find a bit of trivia about Peter Cushing, and that he designed the logo for the Sherlock Holmes Society of London. And I'm gonna take a picture of it and do a PTR here in a second of what it looks like. But I believe it's the same logo they use today, and it's quite something pretty interesting. That you have these Sherlock Holmes stories have been
Oh,
around for a while.
back channel me that on Facebook, and I'll put it onto the podcast.
Okay, here, hold on. I'm gonna take a photo of my computer screen, but you can get the idea if you PTR. You can see the logo that Peter Cushing made for the Sherlock Holmes Society of London, and it's a nice sort of minimalist logo there, and it's still.
So it has the deerstalker in the pipe. That's
Yep.
awesome. Of course, the
So,
deerstalker was also not from the novel.
well, But there's the Sherlock Holmes Society of London is still something that looks like they do newsletters or something every month still to this day, and it's been around since 1951. So that it's still going is something. And I think sometimes you have to see movies that might not be so good or well loved to sort of appreciate the better ones. And at the end of the day, every movie is someone's favorite. I mean, my one of my stepbrothers really loves Battlefield Earth with John Travolta, which I don't understand at all. But
Now that's not a fair comparison. I mean, this film got 95% on Rotten Tomatoes. I mean, it's not. I'm not in some minority view on
no,
it.
I can leave it at that.
It's not Battlefield Earth.
But
Parts of it don't date well. I will admit. And I will admit with High that from a writing standpoint, all Hammer films could have used a dozen or so rewrites. But but no, but there are a lot of gems in it. And as High even said he said it wasn't a very good movie. It is a very interesting film to watch, and it is very and I think High's point about it about the merger of Hammer and Sherlock is important. So I mean, there is a lot to this film, but yeah, it's not considered David Lynch's Dune or anything.
right, no, I'm being a little bit silly here, but yeah, maybe I should give it a different watch or go back and read the story. It's just been I'm so far removed from other Sherlock Holmeses that I think it was easier for me to bag on this one a bit.
I like I said though, if you want to see a good version of this besides this one, which I consider this a good version of it. Like I said, I think it's my favorite adaptation. But don't miss out on that on the Benedict Cumberbatch Sherlock version of this. I thought it was very well done, and it has a lot of I mean a lot of things were added from the story, a ton of things, because of course it's set in 2010 as opposed to in 1889. But it has a lot of real cool elements to it, and I thought it was a very well written episode. And of course, with Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman, really top notch acting. And like I say, I know that's a show that really got a bad rap for its third season, but this isn't a part of that third season. This is when that show was still cooking, and they still had a very good talent around it, and I enjoyed it very much. And it's not that much longer than this version. I think it runs about 93 minutes. So I would give that a watch if you don't want to go back to the Peter Cushing version, which I can understand. As much as I loved it and enjoyed it, I also understand that people get different things out of films. Well, other than that, any other final thoughts, or any other thoughts on Hound of the Baskervilles before we move on to programming? We could set a record for our shortest episode, and if I can stay under an hour, I would actually hit the goal that Spotify set for me for the podcast versions of these, which I don't have the heart to go back and edit our old episodes down to an hour.
I guess you could split them into parts. Um, a part one and part two. That would get them into under an hour for all of them, for most of them anyway. Um, I looked up Rotten Tomatoes, and the audience rating is 73%. The 95 is from reviews. So, but um, I'm guessing that most of those reviews are fanish reviews because big time critics wouldn't be bothered to review this in the first place. So that might be a little skewed. But bottom line is, it didn't appeal to audiences enough to uh, follow through on the plan of making a series of Holmes movies. They did this one. It didn't do well financially. It didn't attract audiences, and so they didn't do any more of them. So that's kind of a a bottom line in terms of audience reaction. But yeah, I mean, we're all I mean, I still think Last Holiday is one of the great films of all time. That didn't get a great reception when I brought it in a few weeks ago. We're all entitled to have movies that we love.
Well,
That
I will go on record as saying Last Holiday was a better film than this one. I will go on record as saying that.
that is really faint praise from my perspective. But anyway, um, uh, but I'm curious what I've gone through most of the films on the schedule at this point. I'm curious what you're thinking of. I'm wondering if we could like maybe discuss a little what you're thinking of instead of just having you, um, pick films on your own in a vacuum. Would you be open to maybe, it doesn't have to be today, but maybe bringing up, I'm thinking of doing this and this and this, just to maybe get some feedback from us?
Yeah, sure, we could start that, or maybe we could have a side room where we're not where it doesn't cut into our conversation about the film, um, or well, I guess it doesn't matter because I could always just edit it off at the end of the podcast. But
That's what
yeah,
I'm thinking is that
yeah.
you can edit stuff.
Yeah, we could do that at the end of each episode. I have to say I did kind of. There is kind of a method to the films that I chose for June July. There is kind of a common theme that I'm kind of going for here, but no, yeah, no, absolutely, because of course, what makes this room is you people. Nobody's going to want to listen to just me spouting off. So,
Well, no,
uh,
it's all of us, but I'm curious what is I'd love to know what the connection is because I've seen most of them at this point. I mean, you said that
well,
you had a
yeah,
connection.
there's a connective tissue in terms of the English story that was being told, and the version of Englishness that was being shown to the world post Empire. And I at the end of this cycle, I kind of go with Silent Voices, Still Lives, as that kind of nostalgic look at that period when England was trying to present that face. And so next week we're going to have A Taste of Honey, which is which is part of the social realism kitchen sink drama movement directed by Tony Richardson, that was the part of England kind of showing we're mature enough to start talking about our working class. And then we go to A Night to Remember, which is not only a recreation of the sinking of the Titanic, but really the English film industry putting its best face forward in terms of having all of its star power in a film, and just a ton of money went into that, and all of the best talent in England had something to do with it. It was literally, they did not care how long it would take for that film to make a profit, and it did take many years before it turned a profit because they were showing that to the world. Kind Hearts and Coronets is the English view of themselves from a comic point of view, and their talk about class. And again, Kind Hearts and Coronets was a film that, and this is going to go for all of the films that I chose, were made by England with an eye towards an export market. Sometimes it worked, and sometimes it didn't. The Wicker Man was the film that we're going to be doing, which basically saved the English film industry. It's considered the Citizen Kane of British horror, and again, it was put forward as kind of the face of English film. And then and I ended the cycle with Distant Voices, Still Lives, which was Terrence Davis's attempt to kind of sum up the period that these films were being made, and through the use of the pop music at the time, and there is also a discussion of the cinema of the time. And so I think by going through each one of these films and then ending it with the Terrence Davies film, we get an entire reflection of that post-war culture from the end of World War II all the way to the pretty much near death of the English film industry in the 1970s and the Harold Wilson Depression era, so I really had I put a lot of thought into the next few choices, and also into the order that I put them in.
Well, that's interesting. First of all, thank you for sharing that. That's interesting and helpful. Um, I'm a little confused because you said that A Night to Remember was someone else's choice. And what was even more puzzling to me is that you said it's not a film I would have chosen, which I've been puzzling about ever since you said that, because it's a magnificent film. Why wouldn't you choose it?
Because I hadn't seen it in so long, quite honestly. And she brought my attention back to it. I was like, God, this is a great film. Wow. How have I forgotten it? And I had forgotten it. I hadn't seen it since 1988. And a matter of
Eric,
fact,
you're saying you didn't, you'd forgotten A Night to Remember?
I was 18 years old. I had discovered
No, I'm
girls
just saying,
and
I'm just saying, A Night to Remember is by definition not something you would
oh
forget.
my God, that went right over my head. The joke went so far over my head, I can't even reach that high. That's a good one, High. I forgot A Night to Remember.
Exactly. Okay, so thank you for explaining that. Um, it's not the type of film you'd pick. It's just that you'd forgotten A Night to Remember. Okay, and now I understand.
Yeah, I never would have chosen it if she hadn't brought it up. And my point was, hey, I never would have chosen The Ruling Class, and I'm really glad, because that turned out to be not only a very, very good room, but a very, very enjoyable film. Now, I think A Night to Remember is a much better film than The Ruling Class, but again, that was a listener suggestion, and that's one of the things I really like about the listener suggestions. So.
Well, let me. So I'm gonna think if there's anything that I want to suggest, but there's nothing off the top of my head. But I'd also like to invite Matt to think about if there's some film that he would like us to cover.
Yeah, let me think of something that's a bit. You tend to pick stuff that tends to be in the 50s or 60s, or you're not really limited by a time frame.
Yeah, no time frame. We did Oppenheimer last year. Not
Oh,
well,
okay.
but we did it.
I mean, I think one I might suggest, if you have room for it, is one I mentioned to High a while ago, called Death to Stalin. It's
The
a
death the
British
death of Stalin.
Death to Stalin. That's it.
Yeah, that's really not very much British, though, is it?
No, I guess
Uh,
not. I guess a lot of the
Michael
characters are
Palin's in it, I guess. So technically, we could make it.
Okay. I think it's something
Yeah,
that's a better fit, but it has to be a movie,
yeah.
right?
That
Yeah,
is a great movie, though.
yeah.
That is a hilarious movie.
It was banned
It,
from Russia.
isn't Michael Caine in that?
No,
Oh,
Michael Palin.
Michael
Michael.
Palin
Palin.
is. Okay.
Yeah, he
Michael Palin,
plays Molotov.
Jason Isaacs, Steve Buscemi, um, Oh, who is
The guy from the Bateman show. The what's his name?
the dad in Arrested Development?
Yeah, that guy. Yeah, I can't remember his name, but that guy. Yeah, highly recommend that
Well,
film. Hi, you would love it. Very enjoyable.
can you take a look at it and see if there's enough UK in it to justify inclusion? Because I would love to do. I'd love to have Matt be able to, pick something.
Or
Could you just
Well, or that might be something because it's got a very, very good screenplay. Maybe that's something that you look at in your writing room when you get that launch too. Hi, because I think that film is uh, uh, a really great example of the 20 teens comedy because it was the guys who made Veep, wasn't it, Matt? The TV show
Yeah,
Veep.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
written and directed by Armando Iannucci.
um, I'm the room that I'm trying to develop will probably be doing contemporary stuff, not uh, older stuff, unless there's a news hook. So, like, we might we might talk about some of Jim Henson's films because Disney just came out with a documentary about Henson. So that gives us a news hook to talk about Dark Crystal and Labyrinth. But um, it's the idea of a room is to be tied to what's happening now, not this room, which can basically span through all of time. Um, like Matt, we also did Zone of Interest um, a few months ago because, so I mean, this room is okay with doing films from any period, but the room I'm thinking about would be a lot more uh, restricted in terms of time, but on the other hand, it would have no restriction in terms of subject. I wouldn't have to worry about if something is UK or American. It could be from anywhere.
Well, I think we could probably squeeze in a Death of Stalin. There's nothing, it's not. I guess I won't have a problem with it. My point behind this room, though, is I'm trying to sell the idea that hey, these are some underrated films that are just as good as anything else in international cinema from their era, and that's an important thing for me. It's I don't know if I've told this story before, but I grew up with these films, and when I went to film school in 1988, when I was 18, and everyone else had their idol directors being whether it was Scorsese, whether it was Spielberg, whether it was Fellini, whether it was Antonioni, whether it was Truffaut, or what have you. And I was talking about people like Tony Richardson, and I was talking about Lindsay Anderson and Powell and Pressburger. Everyone looked at me like I had three heads because that nobody actually associated England with making good films, and it is important to me, I think, to kind of overcome that. But I don't see any reason why we can't have a Death of Stalin room, because it's not like this room's going anywhere, or so I will schedule that, Matt. And if you would, since you suggested it, also do the research, the background research, and host that room, that would be great. One of the things I love when somebody suggests a film, if they can actually take over the hosting duty for that film, I love that because then you get an entirely different perspective. So it's not just my voice. High has done that twice. Those turned out to be both very good episodes. The Dr. Zhivago episode, and of course most recently for Last Holiday, and Scylla did it twice, and I really enjoy that aspect that when somebody brings a film and says, hey, this is a film I want to talk about, if they could take the room over and direct it their way. I take your thumbs up as being a yes. However, no one listening on Facebook or on the podcast could have heard it. So Matt just agreed to that. Well, anyway, any other final thoughts on the Hounds of the Baskervilles before I close this room out, or anything else for that matter? Hi, Matt and Jorge.
It's if if this helps us shoehorn it in. Uh, Free Range Films was an uncredited production company for Death of Stalin, so they're based in London, for whatever it's worth.
Oh my God! Oh, but that thing is but that's as British as beans on toast then.
There you go.
Uh, Matt, any final thoughts on Hound of the Baskervilles or life in general?
Life in general could be here for a while, but yeah, I mean, not Death of Stalin for me. Hound of the Baskervilles. It it makes me want to seek out the other Peter Cushing Sherlock Holmes because I think he's one of my favorite parts of this movie. So it looks like I have my work cut out for me in that regard.
Thank you. And Jorge, any final thoughts?
I never watched this kind of movie before, but I will begin to watch this kind of movies so old, and I think it's very interesting to see the old movies and compare the new ones. Because the old movies about Sherlock Holmes could be interesting. Analyze the developing of this kind of genre, this kind of styles and everything. I would like to be the next Thursday to listen you again and analyze other movie maybe. What could be the next movie? The next.
The next movie is called A Taste of Honey. Last I knew, it was still available on YouTube. If not, I know it's available on Criterion and BFI and several other places. And it's from 1961. It's directed by Tony Richardson. It stars Rita Tushingham. And yep, that'll be our next film. Other than that, any final thoughts? And then I'll be closing the room in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Have a great week, everybody, and we'll see you next Thursday. Thank you again for listening to UK Cinema History. If you want to join the conversation, follow the link in the episode description. Every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we record these episodes live on the Clubhouse app. Hope to see you there. And while you're listening, please rate us and review us on your favorite podcaster. It'd be doing us a great favor. And thanks again.